younger generation. In short, the Academy's ethos is broadly defined as Think Science, Celebrate Technology, Inspire Innovation. Science plays a vital role for economic development and societal well-being. Understanding this, the Academy of Sciences Malaysia was established with a mission to be Malaysia's thought leader in all areas of science, technology, and innovation. To realize its mission, ASM harnesses the nation's top scientific minds to chart the STI direction and facilitates the implementation of an innovation-led economy for the country. ASM's commitment lies firmly in fostering a culture of excellence in STI in Malaysia. ASM does this by providing independent, credible, relevant, and timely STI input of national and international importance to the country. Our network of expertise comprises Malaysian scientists, engineers, and technologists who specialize in various disciplines. The Academy assists in upgrading the nation's technological capabilities in the industrial sectors by producing high-quality publications such as peer-reviewed journals, monographs, and books. In addition, ASM also provides input on current and future technology trends to be considered and taken up by the government in driving the nation's economy forward. To provide Malaysian scientists with the best opportunities and exposure, ASM actively extends its international networks and collaborations. It currently has a range of multilateral engagements with renowned scientific institutions worldwide. The Academy also champions the need to grow the right talent in STI by cultivating interests in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics to the younger generation. In short, the Academy's ethos is proudly defined as Think Science, Celebrate Technology, Inspire Innovation.
Yep. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon, good day to everyone, and special thanks to the organizer, Mahathir Science Award Foundation and Academy Science Malaysia for organizing the International Conference on Tropical Sciences, focusing on the contributions of science and technology in addressing the challenges and value of the tropical region to achieve sustainability. Thank you so much for investing your time with us today. My name is Vela. I'm the CEO of the National Institute of Youth Research Malaysia, an agency under the Ministry of Youth and Sports. And I'm also your moderator for today's session, which will focus on the youth resilience in the tropics. As we all notice, human activities, largely driven by extractive resources use, has threatened the future of the planet and its ecosystems. The prevalent challenges of deforestation, pollution, climate change, migration are largely the consequences of our own way of life that fail to take into account the future of the ecosystem that is supporting our future. So the solution, therefore, only lies within humans by reshaping our relations with nature and helping the communities at all levels to prioritize such actions. On the other hand, young people around the globe have already seen the challenges as a result of COVID-19 in the diverse areas such as disparities in education programs, rising of youth unemployment, and also disproportionate mental and physical health challenges facing young people. So a bit of data that I would like to share with all of you, with the speakers, the panelists, and also with the guests. The tropics makes up about 40% of the planet's surface area. So currently around 42% of the world's population live in the tropics. At current rates of the population growth, by 2050, more than half of the world population will live in the region. By 2050, two-thirds of the world children, which exactly 67% will live in the tropics. So 25% of the world's populations rely on the tropical rainforests to generate food and income. And also the rising temperature and changing rainfalls regimes will have huge impacts on the region, which has remained climatically stable for the past 3 million years. So 85% of the world extreme poor live in the tropics. So this is our concern. So to address these challenges, 17 SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, has been highlighted in 2015 with 169 targets. And 20 of the targets are very specific to youth related, which means the SDG focuses on Goal 2, hunger, Goal 4, education, Goal 5, gender equality, and Goal 8, decent work, goal 10, inequality, and also goal 13, climate change. So how important it is for the people to know that what's happening in the tropics. So I think SDG is part of the initiative to help to assist the young people around the world. That is the emphasis given in SDGs. So why the above matters are important for us? 1 in 5 young people has not completed their elementary education, and most of them are in the tropics. In sub-Saharan Africa, nearly 60% of the youth are out of the school. So this is also our concern. So what's going to happen in the future? So 70.9 million young people are unemployed. And this is not in counting what's happened in the last 2 years under the pandemic situations throughout the world. And 21.8% of youth populations are not in education, employment, and or training, which is under the need group. And 76.9% of them are all women. So this is something which is alarming for us to think together to make sure that the tropics knew the facts and figures and also the data to make sure that relevant strategies or action plan will be taken towards addressing these issues. Moving forward, our panel discussion today will focus on challenges of the tropics, youth resilience in the tropics, followed by the soft launch of the Global Youth Development Index and Reports 2020 by the Commonwealth Secretariat. And highlights of the panel discussion today. Our goal today is to discuss and share new idea, a fresh perspective, a new strategy that you can apply to be more successful in addressing the youth resilience in the tropics. And the highlights are to discuss the roles that the young people can play and want to play in order to achieve the SDGs in the tropics, and discuss the challenges and mechanisms supporting these roles. And the second part of it is identify youth initiatives in the tropics that have created a sustainable impact to the communities, and also to provide a concrete suggestion to ensure young people's voice are included in the decision-making processes. And the last one is to promote networking and exchange of knowledge and experience among youth of diverse backgrounds, including those from the rural and urban settings. So we have seen a lot of initiative by ASEAN, by Asia Pacific, and now we are here in the tropics region. So the topics will be very specifically discussed. A bit of housekeeping matters before I proceed to the panelists. So as you all know, this platform will enable the youth to identify actionable policy recommendations to improve youth prospects and to engage with policymakers in crafting effective responses to the crisis in the tropics. So here, the format to give you an idea what to expect. We will take a few moments for each of the panelists to briefly introduce themselves and tell a bit about the topics. Each panelist will be given 10 minutes, and the Q&A will be the last part of the presentation after we conclude the 4 speakers. And then the second half of the time today, we'll open up the floor to give you an opportunity to ask any specific questions. So this is for the audience. And we will identify a few questions by the audience, and we will address these questions to the panelists to answer. So first panelist is Dr. Terry Ann Gilbert Roberts. Is a research manager in the Economics, Youth and Sustainable Development Directorate of the Commonwealth Secretariat, which represent 54 member states, and many of them are in the tropics. And she will be presenting Youth in the Tropics, Evidence from the Global Youth Development Index. And the second panelist will be Mr. Kee Byom Kim from International Labour Organization, ILO, and he is currently the Macroeconomic and Employment Policy Specialist at the Employment Policy Department of the International Labour Office in Geneva, Switzerland. And his topic will be Youth Employment Trends in the Tropics. The third panelist, Dr. Clarissa Rios Rojas. Dr. Rios Rojas is a research associate at the Center of Study of Existential Risk at the University of Cambridge and works at the interface of science and policy making at the project, A Science of Global Risk at CSER. And the topic of presentation will be the importance of youth involvement in science in the tropics. And the fourth panelist today is Mr. Zawad Alam. He's a team leader from the project WE and Movers Envoy. He is the passionate learner, facilitator, active citizens, climate enthusiast, and also Movers Envoy from Bangladesh. And he will be presenting youth grassroots movement to address climate change. So that is a brief introductions about the four presenters. Now I hand over the first presentations to Dr. Terry. Welcome, Dr. Terry. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Dr. Vela, and good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever you are in the world. I'm so pleased to have this opportunity to share some insights from the Global Youth Development Index and the priorities that it raises for building youth resilience in the tropics. Next slide. I'll do this by speaking first about how we at the Commonwealth Secretariat see the relationship between youth development and resilience. I'll mention what we think is the value of this tool, this Youth Development Index, for monitoring progress. I'll share some broad key trends on the performance of tropical countries on this index before concluding with some of the challenges and limitations we face with compiling this index, and therefore what the implications are for our next steps in moving towards building resilience in terms of policy and also better data. Next slide, please. Let me begin by saying that for us at the Commonwealth Secretariat, youth resilience can only be achieved by investment in a particular process of youth development. We believe that if we invest in a process that is focused on enhancing the status of young people, empowering them, building on their competencies and capabilities, enabling them to contribute to life in all aspects of life, by providing a supportive, enabling environment through legislation, policies, and programs that enable them to participate fully as active citizens in their societies. Only if we do that will we be able to support youth resilience that enables young people to cope with shocks and challenges such as the global pandemic we are all experiencing now. And this is particularly important because so many young people make up the proportion of our global populations. For us in the Commonwealth, it's over 60% of our population are considered to be young people between 15 and 29. Next slide. This multidimensional notion of youth development is grounded in the asset-based empowerment approach to youth development documented in the literature, as a contrast to other approaches such as the deficit, youth for development, equity and welfare approaches that place young people at the center. Next slide, please. And what we want to do is to simplify the multidimensionality of youth development, this complex definition that I offered you, by creating a composite index that measures the performance of 181 countries around the world across 27 indicators and 6 domains. We ascribe scores between 0 and 1 to each country in terms of their overall performance and their performance on each of the indicators and domains to give us an idea of the progress being made towards the SDGs. Next slide, please. The value of this is that by simplifying this multidimensional concept, we are able to provide evidence that supports policy making. We're able to monitor progress towards the SDGs. We're able to compare countries, regions, domains of youth development, and importantly, we can use the tool to raise the profile of youth development by drawing attention to these issues and thereby increasing and advocating for better data, filling data gaps, and importantly, in greater investment for young people. Next slide, please. The 6 dimensions or domains of the 2020 YDI, which we're pleased to launch later today, are on your screen here, that reflect a balance between the experiences of young people and the kind of enabling environment provided for them by their countries in these 6 key areas of youth development. Importantly, the domain on equality and inclusion and peace and security is being measured for the very first time on the 2020 index. The details of the indicators included in each of these domains you will find in the report, and we'll talk a little bit more about later, but have been selected by a group of experts, including young people, as indicators important for understanding youth development. Next slide, please. Against that background, let me just provide some broad level insights into what we see in terms of the performance of countries in the tropics on this index. The data covers the period 2010 to 2018 and therefore provides a sort of baseline for how we were doing pre-pandemic. At that point, we were actually making fairly good progress, slow but positive progress on youth development, as the global average YDI score increased over that period by 3%. Interestingly, for tropical countries, the rate was even faster, with an increase of up to 4%. However, although Singapore is the top country on the 2020 YDI, unfortunately, the absolute scores for each country in the tropics, we have about 79 that are included in the 2020 YDI, still lagged behind the global and Commonwealth averages. In fact, 80% of the 79 tropical countries are considered or categorized to be in low or medium levels of youth development, as opposed to high or very high levels of youth development. Next slide, please. The way we use the index is we can use it to compare trends, as we have done here, to demonstrate, for example, that countries in the tropics, represented by the yellow bar, generally perform lower than the global average on all areas of the index, all domains of the index, except on political and civic participation. That can help us to ask additional questions as to why the performance in tropical countries might be better. Next slide, please. We can then further dig into the regions that make up the tropics by disaggregating the data to look at the experiences of those in Africa, the Caribbean, Central America, South America, etc. And we see here from the data that generally Africa, represented by the first blue bar, and Central America by the fourth yellow bar, generally lags behind other regions on youth development, various domains of youth development, except on participation. Where Central America performs slightly better than other regions in the tropics. Next slide, please. We can further dig into the data there by going into the experiences of individual countries within Central America to discover that, for example, we see that Nicaragua, represented by the yellow bar, is driving a lot of the progress, positive progress, with higher scores on the Youth Development Index in various domains, except on participation, where it is the performance of Honduras that is actually driving the activity. Next slide, please. And of course, we could go further by digging into the experiences of specific countries like Nicaragua, which has performed very well on the health and well-being, with scores very close to 1, meaning almost a perfect score on various aspects of health and well-being for young people. So we use the data here, next slide please, in order to pose questions about deep analysis that needs to take place on what's happening in each region, in each country, and by indicator. However, there are challenges. The data is not perfect. There have been challenges harmonizing data across various age groups between 15 to 24, 15 to 29. Data for small states remains unavailable, and data on digital engagement and youth participation is still not as suitable as we hope it would be. Next slide, please. So it means that our YDI does not and should not measure everything. One of the questions we ask is whether the global index hides localized issues. In other words, the picture I've just shown you of what's happening in the tropics, in Central America, in Nicaragua, is that the experience of every young person within Nicaragua, for example, or is that the experience of every category of youth in the country? And indeed, since we published this index, perhaps there have been policy changes that would change the context for youth development that cannot yet be measured immediately by our index. So this means, based on these challenges, we have some next steps we should take. Next slide, please. Well, certainly our first next steps, the implications for our future, is to advocate for better youth data. Let's encourage partnerships between a wide range of stakeholders, including and national statistical offices and youth departments, to deepen the research and promote the development of national YDIs that can give us a more refined picture of what's happening in each country. Finally, next slide, please. I'll end by saying that the report also offers some policy recommendations on how we can build youth resilience by looking at those trends that I highlighted of areas of good performance and low performance. We see that, for example, increasing the influence of young people in decision making, especially on issues like climate change, which is highlighted in the report, is critical for us to move forward to building resilience. And I look forward to my colleague's presentation later on the kinds of initiatives around climate change that would enable us to do that. But we must continue to exchange good practice and legislation and policies from the best performing countries to move forward on youth resilience. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Terry, for the wonderful presentations. And we will move forward for the second panelist at this time. As a second panelist, I would like to invite Mr. Ki Byung Kim. You have 10 minutes. Mr. Ki?
Yes, so thank you very much, Bella, for this opportunity, and also to the organizers for this opportunity for me and the ILO to participate in this international conference on tropical sciences and share a few thoughts on youth employment in the tropics. I think Terry Hannah has already laid out this index in which employment and economic opportunity is one component, and I'll be adding to that by really going in much more depth into the issue of youth employment in the tropics. Next, please. And so my presentation today will be divided into three broad areas. First, I'm going to explore the labor market situation of young people in the tropics prior to the COVID-19 pandemic. And then I will examine the impact that the pandemic has had on youth labor markets and the current very fragile and uneven recovery that is taking place. And then finalize my presentation by just raising a few policy implications in relation to building resilience of youth in labor markets. Next slide, please. And so there's some 2.4 billion people of working age. So those are people between the ages of 15 to 64 in the tropics. And this is a formidable group that accounts for almost half of the global working age population. And of the 2.4 billion people of working age, almost 60%, so 1.5 billion people participate in the labor market in the tropics in some form or other. And most of these people that are employed in the tropics are working in services, although of course there are wide variations between regions. So for example, the share of employment in agriculture is highest in Africa, whereas for example the share of employment in services is highest in the tropical regions of Latin America and the small island developing states. And when you compare the situation of employment in the tropics to that of the global average, we can see, for example, that the share of employment in agriculture is higher in the tropics compared to the global average, whereas the share of employment in manufacturing and services is lower. I'm sorry, not service, manufacturing and services is lower in the tropics compared to the global average. Next slide, please. And of the 2.4 billion people of working age, some 676 million are between the ages of 15 and 24 in the tropics. And this accounts for a much higher proportion, 56% of the global youth population. So we can see here that the tropics is a very dynamic and young region. And when we look also a little bit more closely at exactly what kind of activities these 676 million young people are undertaking, we can see, for example, that the majority of them, 381 million, are actually outside of the extended labor force. So what we call they're inactive. They're either in school or they're taking care of their children or taking care of their families. The next larger group are those who are employed. And so 234 million people are employed. If you could go back to the previous slide, please. And And in addition to the employed, we have people who are 38 million people who are unemployed. In addition to the unemployed, what we call people who are part of the potential labor force. So some 23 million people in the tropics. And the potential labor force is really composed of people who have some sort of attachment to the labor market, but they're not classified as unemployed statistically. And this is because in order to be classified to be unemployed statistically, it's actually, you have to be both looking for a job and also be available for a job. And so if, for example, you're looking but not available, or you're available but not looking, you'll be classified, you are jobless, but still you have some sort of attachment to the labor force, and hence this use of this indicator, the potential labor force. Next slide, please. And so most of the inactive that I mentioned, most of the people outside of the labor force are in education, but some people are not. And we can see, for example, what may be, who may and may not be in education through an indicator that is, that as Vela indicated before, is actually part of the SDG indicators. And that is the needs rate, or the share of youth not in employment, education, or training. So these are young people who are not undertaking education, who don't have jobs, and so it really reflects the untapped potential of young people. And so we can see, for example, that need rates are very high throughout globally, but also it's higher compared to global average in the tropics. And as we can see here in the graph, there are wide differences also between the tropical regions And the other thing we see is that need rates, these rates of need are much higher for young women than they are for young men. And this is, there are various reasons behind, but one reason behind it, of course, is this gender norms in which women are undertaking substantial share of family and child responsibilities. Next slide, please. And youth unemployment rates in the tropics are high, similar to the global average, but for example, 13.9% of young people are unemployed. This compares to only 3.1% of adults being unemployed. And so, and also when we look at unemployment rates between tropical regions, we see that there are large differences. In some regions, there are also gendered differences, whereby some women are more likely to be unemployed than men, whereas in other regions, men are more likely to be unemployed. Next slide, please. But when we look at the labor force participation rates, one area that all tropical regions show a gender discrepancies in that of labor force participation, with, for example, the gap between the male and female labor force participation rate almost being 20 percentage points in the tropics, highest in Asia Pacific, and lowest in this case in Africa, and also the gender gap being higher than the global average. Next slide, please. And we know that significant progress has been made in improving the quality of jobs in the tropics, and this can be, and one indicator that we can measure this is the extreme working poverty rate of youth. And as we can see here, between 2000 and 2019, the share of young people who are working but not earning enough to lift themselves and their families above the 1.90 poverty line has decreased substantially. But at the same time, there's a significant share of youth, almost still 20% of youth who are in working poverty. Next, please. And so let me just move now to the impact. So that more or less described the situation in the tropics before the COVID-19 pandemic. And let me just move on to some more, to really exploring how the COVID-19 pandemic affected labor markets around the world and in the tropics. So as we can see here on the left-hand side graph, for example, which shows the growth of employment, we can see that there was consistent employment growth in the past 20 years, more or less, until we had this huge impact from the COVID-19 pandemic, and employment actually decreased by almost 10% in 2020 compared to 2019. So a huge a huge impact on the labor market. I think that for many of us, the previous large impact on the labor market was in 2008, 2009, when the global financial and economic crisis happened. But we can see, for example, in this graph that compared to that, there was hardly a blip in the figure, whereas you can see this very large fall in employment as a consequence of the pandemic. Although we don't really have that much data, enough country observations to have a comprehensive impact on the tropics, we have some data from middle-income countries, and we know, for example, that the majority of middle-income tropics countries are middle-income countries, and we can see, for example, that first. That the impact in the fall of employment was larger in high-income countries was larger in middle-income countries relative to high-income countries, and this is of course because of vaccines, but also higher-income countries had more fiscal space to undertake specific policies, and also, in second, the other major impact that we can see here is that young women have been impacted disproportionately in both high-income countries and middle-income countries, and this is reflected in the graph on the left, with young women being the blue bars. And this is a negative graph, and so the more you move to the left, it's a bigger negative impact on employment. Next graph, please. And these losses in employment have translated primarily into inactivity rather than increases in unemployment. I'm sorry, there's a typo here, but if employment decreases, that can translate into either an increase of inactivity or increase in unemployment. And we can see here that in many middle-income countries, that employment losses have actually translated into higher unemployment rather than higher inactivity rather than unemployment. Next slide, please.
Mr. Key, you have last 1 minute to wrap up.
Yes, okay. So I still do have a few slides, but just to say that that need rates have also increased as a result of the pandemic. They have since subsequently come down, but have increased as a pandemic. Next slide. And so why have young people, especially young women, been so disproportionately affected by the COVID-19 pandemic? And the first is that they were more likely to be found in the sectors that have been hit hardest. So, for example, accommodation and food services. Young people also, easier and cheaper to fire, and they've benefited less from some of the policies undertaken by countries around the world, including job retention policies. Next slide, please. And when we look at the recovery that we can see, for example, in this graph, that higher income countries, thanks in many cases to the fiscal stimulus packages that they have been undertaken, they're recovering at a slow, but at a certain they're recovering. But we can see that the recovery in middle income countries, the MICs, has really stalled in 2021. Next slide. Okay, so this brings me more or less to the end of my presentation. To summarize, COVID-19 has really exacerbated pre-existing labor market challenges for youth, especially for young women. And the reductions in youth employment has translated primarily into inactivity and increases in need rates rather than increases in unemployment. And so and within this context, the critical importance of policies on education as well as strengthening labor market attachment. And the current recovery is also weaker in middle-income countries, including the tropics, compared to high-income countries and among young people. And so, in order to address this youth employment challenge for young people, more targeted job creation measures are required. Next slide. And in one area, of course, where this more targeted measures are required is in environmental areas. And I think my next panelist will actually go into more details of this. But I think just to highlight that as we move as we transition to a greener economy, there will be many job opportunities, but also job losses. And so we need to look at the net impact and also build, strengthen social protection systems in order to support those who will not be so easy to transition into a greener economy. Next slide, please. So just to say before I end this, that at the UN, at the United Nations, there is in which the ILO is leading. There is the Global Initiative on Decent Jobs for Youth, in which many of these issues are being discussed and knowledge shared. And so I would invite you to take a look at that global initiative. And next slide. And thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Kee Byung Kim, for your presentations. And moving forward, I think we have got small changes here. I think we will start the next presenter with Mr. Zawad. So for the presentation today, I would like to invite Mr. Zawad Alam. So you may start your presentation, Mr. Zawad.
Thank you so much, Dr. Vela, for giving me the floor. And I would like to give heartiest thanks to International Conference on Climate Tropical Science for inviting me today and to share my journey with everyone. So before moving on to my part, let me introduce myself. I am Jawad Alam from one of the most beautiful countries of South Asia in Bangladesh. But the fact is, Bangladesh is a riverine country and we have faced a lot of climate issues in my country. Having said that, when I was studying in my university life, when I was studying about environmental education, I felt that the people are not well aware about the term climate literacy, and the rural people or the marginalized community don't have enough knowledge on climate education. That's why I started my journey on Project We and started my working on making people aware through digital contents. And I own the COP26 Challenge Farm from Active Citizens British Council, Bangladesh, and it was also supported by Wave Foundation. Moving on to the next part. So while working on our project, next slide please, I actually initiated a 50 days climate awareness program where we actually publish different type of digital content, and we wanted to reach to the marginalized community through digital contents, because at that very time the whole country was in lockdown position. We all were facing a serious crisis in the COVID-19 situation, but we have to work on climate issues, we have to work on climate resilience and so on. That's why we planned this 50 days climate awareness campaign. We wanted to reach to the every single corner of my country in order to teach them that what climate literacy is all about. And that's why we started this initiative. And there are so many events in this initiative that I will discuss in the later part. Moving on to the next one. Firstly, we actually created a digital contest and we have published 50 articles from our own Facebook page, and it actually we wanted to reach to the community that what are the topics that we should address while fighting with the climate change and so on. And we also published climate awareness videos and documentaries. And since I am also a Movers Envoy of a Movers program, I had access to the all over Asia Pacific, and there are so many people who actually helped me to reach to the community, because they actually sent me so many videos, awareness messages, and we wanted to create a movement not only in Bangladesh but also in all over Asia Pacific, that yes, it is the time we should work on, and this is the time where we should actually focus on climate change, and youth are the one who can actually take this change. Moving on to the next slide. Then we came with the event idea that how we can reach to the people from the school communities, college students, university students. So that's why we actually tried to implement different type of events like climate quiz, messenger chatbot, and we were the one who actually brought an automated climate chatbot service for where actually people can go to our page, they can actually give a message and they can actually test their climate knowledge by giving 30 questions, and all are automated, and that has been developed by one of my friends. He actually helped me to build this messenger chatbot platform. And we also work on the training. We have conducted different training sessions and workshops, and Movers program have already been a big inspiration and a support for me in conducting all these workshops. Moving on to the next one. We also launched different type of events like My Home, My Garden photography competition, plastic crafting challenge, climate stories, where we actually wanted to show the people that yes, there are so many things to do. And when we actually launched this program, we got more than 200 ideas, 200 pictures, where people are actually encouraging people to do the home gardening. And our sole purpose was to make people aware about the gardening, vertical gardening, and so on. Moving on to the next slide. you can see that there we are also promoting tree plantation, vertical gardening, and we did this prototyping in one of the industrial areas of Bangladesh named Gazipur, where we actually showed them that if you have an industry or the urbanization has actually destroying the plantation. So what you can do, you can actually now move on to the modern solution, that is a vertical gardening. I wanted to promote this in the country, that yes, vertical gardening can be a solution if you are living in the urban areas. No matter what happens, no problem is there, if you don't have enough land, you can always use the vertical wall to promote plantation and gardening. So moving on to the next slide. So if we see the participant demographic analysis, actually we have already in the last 2 months, we actually trained 424 participants, and where 37.97% was male and 91.50% was for students. And there were people from the marginalized community, there were people from the international community, and so on. That's what actually wanted to create a climate awareness among the people. Moving on to the next one. If we see the overall summary of the demography report, we see there were 395 local people who actually joined our session. And not only that, 29 international participants also joined us. 2 were from Azerbaijan, 5 were from Nepal, 15 from India, and 7 from Sri Lanka. So these are the people who actually helped me to build my confidence on working on climate issues. And that's what I would like to give heartiest thanks to my whole team of Project We, who actually helped me to build all this digital contents, publishment, and all the other things that we did in this 50 days climate awareness program. Moving on to the next slide. If we see the summary at a glance that what we have done in the last 2 months, we have published 50 articles on climate, named as Climatepedia. We have launched 10 climate quizzes. We have published 5 episodes of climate stories, 15 episodes of the general knowledge question like did you know, 2 episodes of climate podcast, and we also launched the climate quiz on 3 different levels. Like if you are a kid or if you are a school student, you can take part in the beginner level. If you are a college student, you can go into the intermediate level. But if you want to check your advanced knowledge on climate issues or climate actions targeting on age 13, you can also take the advanced quiz as well. Moving on to the next slide. So here we see all the report that we have done so far. We have already trained 424 youths in these 2 months. There were 80 climate leaders who are working in my project, and now there are 30 amazing climate leaders who are working day long to fight the climate issues. Some are developing modules, some are planning for workshops, some are writing contents, and some are making skills for the digital content, because this is the thing which actually lack of. And when we were making the digital content, we thought that there are so many videos on internet, but many people don't understand this because of the net, because all the contents are in English, and my country people, my native language is Bangla. So that's why we actually try to make different digital videos on my own native language, so that it doesn't end here. The journey doesn't end here. I want to take all these videos to the marginalized community, and it is open for everyone. We will publish in the YouTube and all other social media, so that everyone, irrespective of age, culture, religion, can use this video in order to fight for the climate actions. Moving on to the next slide. To sustain all the learning, we have already published an ebook, and it was possible because of the collaboration made by Chalkboard, who actually helped me to publish this easy guide to environmental protection, where we have publish different type of things, like what you can do in order to fight climate action in 3 levels, like what you can do in the personal level, what you can do as a society, as a local people, and what you can do as a state or stakeholders. So what we have done, like what we believe that there should be some curriculum from the primary level, how to fight these issues, because there are so many vulnerable people who are living in the rural areas, who are living in the climate prone areas, who don't know how to fight these disasters, how to fight these climate issues. So we are the one who should come forward and take these lessons to every single person, that yes, we should do it right now. We have to take the action now. And that's what we do for the Movers program, that we want to mobilize the youth people to take actions on climate issues, sustainable development goals, and so on. moving on to the last part of my presentation. And for this work, we have got some recognition from the Youth Collab, UNDP, and our report was published in one of the leading newspaper of Bangladesh, Business Standard. Moving on to the next part. So would like to acknowledge each and everyone for being a part of our journey, because of your encouragement, because of the support that we got from the Bangladesh and also the international community. We are very much thankful to you. And as a team leader of Positive, I would like to give an heartiest thanks to this conference and to all the organizers for inviting me today and to share my stories. And moving on to the last part of my session, I would like to say that this is the report that we have published. And moving on to the last part, we would like to say we have to take the actions right now. Let's plant more and trees, save our Mother Earth, because at the end of the day, there will be no planet B. So let's join the movement. Let's work for the climate actions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Zawad, for the great insight and also the initiative that you have shown. I think you are very energetic in terms of moving this project. All the best to you. And yeah, moving forward, I think we have one more presenter as a last presenter, Dr. Clarissa Rojas, for the next 10 minutes. And this one will be pre-recorded sessions. So we will play the video then.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for the invitation to the organizers. It's my pleasure to be here at the International Conference on Tropical Science, Contributions to Sustainability, and more specifically, I'm very happy to be at the panel of Youth Resilience in the Tropics. I'm Clarissa Rios Rojas. I'm from Peru, and I'm a molecular biologist, but after finishing my PhD, I decided to jump into government science advice and science diplomacy. Nowadays, I work at the Center for the Study of Existential Risk at the University of Cambridge, and I'm like the bridge between science and policy making for my center. And so today I was asked to bring some sort of advices based on my professional path. So I'm going to be sharing, I think, 3 points with you, and I'll be very happy to be contacted and receive some questions from you once I'm done. So I'm going to make myself very small now. Let me see if I can do that. Yes, perfect. So I think that one of my first advices will be to rely on the power of mentoring. I think that all of us, if we are lucky enough, have had good mentors through our life, being a teacher at university, at high school, or in our own laboratories, or in our group where we are working. And I think that at each step of our careers, we should be trying to switch mentors and try to seek for new type of advices that are more interdisciplinary, intergenerational, and that allow us to grow as a person. And one of the things that I experienced during my life was that I had, most of the time, not always, really good role models. So when I was finishing my PhD, I thought that in Latin America, we didn't have this opportunity so much. It's very common there that professors at university are seen like in a very high level in the clouds, and the students don't feel comfortable talking about their fears, their questions, and they even feel ashamed to ask for help and some mentoring. So what I decided to do then in 2015 was to create a blog. It was a blog at the beginning, and in this blog I will be sharing all my experiences abroad, how I found a scholarship to go to Finland, how without a scholarship in Finland, I could find a master in Sweden and then find side jobs that will allow me to work and study, then how I found a job in Germany, and then how I finally got connected to my future boss in Australia. And I thought that all these stories were worth mentioning, so they could show to people that was younger than me that there are pathways, the different ways and routes that we can follow for achieving our academic dreams. And when I was finishing my PhD, I decided to create this blog that later turned into a big organization that was focused on giving mentorship to Latin American students and young professionals. And the name is called Ekpapalek, which means teaching a little kid to give the first steps in the lengua Shiwilo, which is a language from the Amazon in Peru. So very, very tropical. And that experience was absolutely amazing. I say we because it started with me just sharing things in a blog, and then it started with me giving mentorship to anyone that needed, to bring a group of my friends to get together and say like, okay, we're gonna become mentors and we're gonna share our stories, share how we made it, what we have learned from our own paths during these studies and working abroad. And that's what we did. We started with 6 mentors, and then at some point we became like 50 mentors, and all of us working together, helping Latin American talent. And you can read a little bit more about that in an article I wrote for Nature that talks about the need for giving mentoring in the languages that the students speak. And at one point, we were offering mentoring not only in Spanish, but also in Portuguese and in Quechua, which is a language that the Inca civilization spoke and is still spoken in different parts of Latin America. And I think that with this, what I want to say is that there are 2 things that I will encourage you to do. One, to find a mentor. And second of all, if you don't have these platforms to start a mentoring program in your university or in your community, you can start the program. Be you the driving force that can bring these type of platforms and help to your community, and then grow together and take it from there. I learned the process, and it was an amazing experience that I had to finish, unfortunately, like 1 or 2 months ago due to other commitments, but it was fantastic, and all of us are quite happy with what we achieved. Second of all, I would like to talk to you a little bit about the power of using science for broader society. And when I say this, I mean all the good things that you can do outside your laboratory or outside your fieldwork or outside being enclosed in a university, just focusing on your research. And I say this because this pathway really helped me to become a better professional, to find new passions. When I finished my PhD, I really wanted to do something that had more global impact, and it was very aligned with global priorities. And this discovery journey really helped me to achieve that and reach the University of Cambridge and work at the Center for the Study of Existential Risk. Here, there are just some pictures that remind me of some of the highlights that allow me to do this process. One of them was to join the Global Young Academy, which is, I'm sure you have like the National Academy in your country. So the Global Young Academy is the same, an academy for people that is working on science, that are academics, social science, life sciences, and then we work together doing different projects. And some of the projects that I work on were on government science advice, women empowerment, what is the current situation of young scientists in Latin America, and many of these type of programs. And I met really amazing people that is ready to work for the planet and to make it better. And I think that this was amazing. Some of the other things that I also did when I finished my PhD was to push myself out of my life science, comfort zone, and go to international conference that were focused on global governance, on politics, on human rights, on education for sustainable development goals. And here there are some pictures when I have been, for example, joining the Eisenhower Fellowship in the US, or when I was a UNESCO delegate, learning more about the sustainable development goals and the education behind it. Here's a picture also at the World Science Forum, where I've been in 2 World Science forums, the one for peace that was amazing in Jordan, and there were a group of scientists thinking about how can we bring peace through science and through science diplomacy, and it was really amazing. There is another picture that I went to the Forum for Women in Science in Egypt, and I was fascinated by seeing the amount of women working on different fields, and I learned from them. And like breaking up stereotypes that you have in your mind is also such a wide opening for my life and for my future decisions. And also I made an effort to be part of international organizations. For example, I became a reviewer for the IPPR, and then by then this organization was working with the United Nations developing a scientific agenda for the UN Secretary Office. So I was one of the reviewers for that. I also joined the Geneva Center for Security Policy, which is an organization that is training civil servants and diplomatics about different issues. So I was training them in topics of technology and how society perceives technology, what are the risks of some type of technology. I also work at the European Commission working on science and technology studies. And for someone that comes from life science, pure molecular biology and biology, it was really tough, but it was also so enriching. And I want to share these feelings that I have of gratitude to all these experiences. And these experiences came because me trying to push myself out of my comfort zone as a scientist. And I'm sure that if you also do that, you will be quite happy with the results. Right now, I'm working at, as I said, at the University of Cambridge, and part of my role is to think about how we can go from knowledge into action. And we produce a lot of research and knowledge in terms of what are global catastrophic risks, what are the events that are going to make humanity to collapse, what are the events that are affecting not only humans, but the whole biodiversity that we have in the planet, and what we can do to manage it, to prevent it, and also to mitigate it if we are a little bit too late. And during the last year and a half, for example, I have produced a report that I encourage all of you to go and take a look. It's called Pathways to Linking Science and Policy in the Field of Global Risk. The field of global risk is really an excuse to show how we as scientists, academics, can work with other stakeholders, which can be government, could be technological companies, it could be citizens, and then together try to change policies that are going to affect citizens in our country and globally. In this report, you're going to find different routes and pathways that different academics have followed in order to do some impactful actions. And also you're going to have a checklist of things that you can do before, during, and after your research in order to think and to put your lenses of impact in policy. And I think this is something that could be used by many academics, and it's going to be very good, because at the end, what we want with all these different stakeholders is to co-create, to co-produce, and to co-disseminate research and policy. And the earlier you start, I think it's going to be the better. And the second picture on the right shows what we're actually doing between last week and this week, which is to create a resilient global catastrophic risk science and policy interface. And what we are doing is to gather academics and put them together with policy brokers, policy makers, and make them talk to each other, make them understand what are the limitations, what are the aims, what can research produce and give to policy that can be beneficial, what can policy do that can make research more useful. How can I reframe my research in order to think ahead and said, like, this, my government is going to be using it, so I'm going to produce this within this year, I'm going to have some feedback from them, and then I'm going to produce evidence and scientific facts that are going to be actually useful and are going to change the future of my own country. So I think that this is very needed, not only for global risk, but also for what you want to achieve in this conference. What do you personally and individually want to achieve from coming to this conference? You want to make change, you want to do something different, you want to keep what you are doing but enhance it. So I think these type of conversations and collaborations are definitely worth considering for the future of your career and the future of your institutions and the future of your governments. And I think with that, I'm going to finish because I don't have much time. thank you so much for being this late and listen to my presentation. And of course, you can reach out to me or to our center. I'm leaving there the website and my personal website where all my social media and emails are there. So please reach out, and looking forward to meet you. Thank you so much, and I wish you a great day ahead.
Thank you. I think on behalf of the organizer, I would like to thank Dr. Clarissa for the presentation as well. Even though it's recorded, I think she has shared vision and also some research experiences as well. So now we move into the next agenda, which is the panel discussions and Q&A. So I would like to just start with Dr. Terry Ann Gilbert Roberts. You know, the inclusion, I think I'll go straight away to the questions. I think, Doctor, is that okay? So I will go with one questions for each of the panelists first, and then we'll look at the time later on. And if, let's say, for example, we got more time, and then we'll go for the second round. Okay, the first one, the inclusion of the fifth and the sixth domain, which is equality and inclusion and peace and security as part of Global Youth Development Index 2020 in addressing SDG initiative is a great move forward. Do you think that these domains could be the answer to the challenges faced by the youth in the tropics? Dr. Terry?
Thank you, Dr. Vela. That's a very interesting question. And in fact, as I listened to Key's presentation, where he revealed some of the inequities that we are now seeing in employment trends as a result of the pandemic, it gives us, it reinforces the importance of those new domains. So on equality and inclusion in that domain, for example, we look specifically at the extent to which there's gender parity in needs, those not in employment, education, or training. We look at gender parity in safety and security, and we look at gender parity in literacy. And all of those areas are areas in which continually we see differentiated experiences for young men, young women, boys and girls, those living in poverty, out of poverty, on these issues. Young women still continue to feel less safe than young men in most parts of the world. Key has outlined the disproportionate effect of unemployment levels on young women as a result of the pandemic. And we're also seeing differentiated gender differences on literacy and educational attainment. So by tracking these kinds of indicators, it helps us to have more targeted approaches in our policies for tropical countries. So I do believe that this is an important area. There are things we can't measure on the index. For example, the experiences of people with disability have fared in employment and education.
Thank you, Dr. Terry. I think very interesting, to know more details about it. I think the reports is already available. Global Youth Development Index 2020 is quite important for, I think, all of us to just have a look. I think quite good findings are there for us to use as the platform for the development of the youth in each of the regions, countries, and also people around us. Okay, I move forward for the second questions to Mr. Key, Byung Kim, youth employment. The first question is, youth make up 25% of the global working age populations, yet they account for 40% of the total unemployment. So young people are almost 3 times more likely to be unemployed than adults. This has been reported by ILO to 2019. Can you elaborate on this matter, particularly among youth in the tropics? I think you have, Mr. Key, I think you have touched some of the points and data in your presentation. So I pass it on to you.
Yes, so thanks very much for the question. Yes, I think, so as I mentioned briefly in my presentation, there are a large group of young people in the tropics who are unemployed. some 13% young people who are unemployed. But I think a bigger challenge is really that rather than unemployment is really that of informality, people in poor quality jobs, for example, in working poverty. If in higher income countries, there's unemployment insurance, so people, if they lose their job, can rely on unemployment insurance to tide them over. But in lower income countries, such unemployment insurance is often unavailable. And so when a young person or adult loses their job, it's not like they can rely on public unemployment insurance to tide them over. Instead, they have to go and work somehow, and often that is they work in the informal economy. And so I think this the issue of youth unemployment is a serious challenge, but I think also highlights and I quickly described how the COVID pandemic has really led to increases in inactivity and NEET rates rather than unemployment. And so I think it really describes the need to capture a wide range of labor market variables in order to really get a better picture of what is happening in the labor market.
Mr. Key, I think current situation in the last 2 years, I think this is not only the tropics regions, but I think throughout the global. So we experience the pandemic situations where a lot of difficulties in terms of getting a job and all that. Do you think that the vocational training is going to be one important element to answer some of the challenges by the tropics at this moment of time?
Yes, I think so. I mean, I think for sure they can play an important role. We saw, for example, that I'm Korean, and in the case of Korea, for example, we saw how government policies at first, had a lot of emphasis on primary education. It subsequently, as the economy developed, that focus was placed more on vocational training. And now that it's developed a bit more, their emphasis, of course, is more on innovation and tertiary education as such. But as economies develop, an appropriate focus on vocational training can provide important pathway for young people to find good and productive jobs. I think the challenge in this current COVID-19 situation is that it has also disrupted education, and as Terry-Ann has pointed out. But I think there's been disruptions to the education, not only the vocational education, but all sorts of education through remote learning. And the challenge, of course, is strengthening, and there's been a lot of employment, learning losses have taken place. And so the challenge of strengthening all education, whether primary, vocational, in order to get us out better from this COVID-19 pandemic and strengthen the recovery.
I think I've got a few more things, but this is an interesting area, your employment part of it. So just moving forward for the next question, still in employment. So the young graduates are having some trouble in terms of finding the entry-level jobs, to match their qualification. I think this is throughout the world. I mean, looking very specific to tropics. So what do you take? What is your taking on it, Mr. Key?
I mean, yes. So I think one of the key challenges is that when young people in the tropics or in other parts of the world come into the labor market during a difficult recession, as we are experiencing right now, they can often be trapped in jobs for which they're underqualified, or in jobs that, for example, because formal economy, firms in the formal economy, because of the pandemic, they have, restrictions, there's less demand, they're not hiring as much. And so younger people have a hard time. And so oftentimes they can settle for, poor quality jobs. The challenge of that is that once, if you settle for these jobs, we know from experience, especially in developing countries, especially for example, in tropics countries, that it's not easy for these people to come out from these jobs in which they're kind of trapped and move into higher quality jobs. And so I think there's a space for governments to play an important role in ensuring a smoother first school to work transition, and also in ensuring that it's easier for job to job transitions to take place. And I think for some of these job to job transitions, which can include, for example, the transition from an informal to formal job, the issue lifelong learning plays a very important role. And I think that's something that has been emphasized by many organizations, but a very important role for lifelong learning in supporting transitions.
Thank you, Mr. Key. So moving forward to the next questions for Mr. Zawad. Okay, Mr. Zawad, talking about youth resilience in addressing climate change adaptation, however, achieving these goals will require placing grassroots communities at the center of resilient planning, since they are the ones driving the actions from the ground up. So what is your taking on this statement, and what kind of initiative should be taken in addressing these challenges in the tropics, apart from your initiative under the Project WE?
Thank you so much, Dr. Vela. I think this is a very burning question right now, and climate change is going to have a severe impact on the tropics, and we have to do the climate, because of the climate change we have to refer to the adaptation, we have to adjust with the climate change and all. So if I actually say what we have done from our side, it is one part of the country, and there are so many other people in the marginalized community who are actually facing the problem. For example, I am living in the capital city of Bangladesh, that is Dhaka, but there are so many people who are living in the riverine side, coastal area. They are the ones who are the most sufferers. I think what we can do right now is we can move on to the different level, like we can create a reliable source for the information, because whenever it's very important to gather information, like whenever climate is striking out or whenever a disaster is coming out, and we'll have to emphasize on climate literacy, environmental education from the grassroots level, because whenever I came into my university, I think I've learned about sustainable development goals, I've learned about the climate action. But whenever I was in the primary school, whenever I was in the secondary school, I didn't have that much knowledge. I think it's very important to include such type of things in the curriculum at the very beginning. And mind mapping is very important. I think construct planning, whenever they are the one who are the sufferers, if there is a group discussion or FGD, focus group discussion, is being carried out with the people, with the representative or the youth representative from different localities, I think they will be able to trace out a proper plan of action, a mind mapping, which they will be able to do to fight the climate action. I think it's very important to include all the youth who are actually the sufferers with the stakeholders of the government, because sometimes we see there is a gap between the youth and the stakeholder. There is a gap between the youth and the government. I think we should actually arrange a mind mapping or the focus group discussion to find the solution for their own community.
As the climate experts, we have talked about SDG, and there are some of the SDG which focus, the 20 targets out of 169 targets of SDG are focusing on the youth. If you look into goal 13, so that is very specifically targeting the climate change. So do you think that a necessary actions has been taken till today to overcome this in the tropics?
Well, I think the changes have started, but it's not that well enough. Or I think being a part of the privileged society, I can actually access all the information, but you have to see the other part. But we have to see the other part of the country. There are so many other locality where actually they don't have any knowledge about climate education. They don't know how this greenhouse effect is creating a greater effect in the whole country, and what is the what are the consequences if we actually destroy the natural resources, if we cut down these trees. So I think the changes have been are going to take place, but it's not that proper much, and the government, our society, and also the individual level, we should all come forward to fight this issue.
Thank you, Mrs. Zawad. I think I will come back if I've got a time. I will come back to you because it's quite interesting to know more about the climate change as well. So I think we move forward to Dr. Terry Ann. The next questions for you are from, from the Global Youth Development Index perspective. Which domains should be given more attention in terms of, I know all the domains are important, I went through all the domains, and I go through your reports from 2016, the 2016 reports as well, with the 4 domains. Now we have additional 2 domains in 2020. So I know all the domains are important, but just for the sake of discussion today, which domains that you think should be given a more immediate action towards helping the youth in the tropics?
Thank you, Dr. Vela. It's an interesting question because on the one hand, I'm tempted to just offer my top 2 domains. As you said, they're all important, but I'm tempted to offer my top 2 domains. But before I do that, I'll just offer a caveat, which is that the decision about the priorities have to be made at the regional level, at the country level, and at the community level. The reason that we provide the data in such a way that it can be disaggregated and encourage national level and community discussion is because the domains, the scores we offer give you only the first step in the diagnostic process. We give you an idea of where you should look, particularly at those areas where your country may have the lowest scores, maybe a place to start, but you need to begin to bring all the stakeholders together to better understand where the priorities are for each country. Having said that, I think I can safely say that because political and civic participation is the only domain, the only one of the 6 to have deteriorated over the period of time, that certainly is an area of priority, not just for countries in the tropics, but for all countries in the world. In fact, there's no country that achieved a high level of youth development on political participation on this index, not one. All countries have performed very poorly. So it suggests that we still have not done enough to develop the kinds of policies, institutions, and mechanisms that allow young people to fully participate in decision making. The second area that I would prioritize is the one you mentioned before, which is the equality and inclusion. Given what we have seen with the digital divide, the gender gaps in employment, and the challenge inequalities in education and so on, this issue of equality and inclusion is going to be critically important going forward for building resilience in a recovery period.
Thank you, Dr. Terry. I think I move on to the next questions to Mr. Key. Mr. Key, young people across the world are worried with the new technologies, especially you're talking about robotics, you're talking about AI, so, and this is going to be a big challenge for them in terms of getting the jobs. So can you say a few words in that?
Yes, thank you. Thanks very much. So, great question. I think there is around the world, at both adults and, of course, young people in the tropics or otherwise, both anxiety and as well as great hope with technologies, with these advanced technologies. I think the first thing I want to say is that this is actually not the first time. I think so we're calling it the 4th industrial revolutions, but these anxieties have happened throughout history. Back from the very industrial revolution, there were anxieties or worries that for example, a weaving loom was going to displace many workers and as such, and so it did, and it did. But I think we also have to remember the other side of the coin, but it also led to a great number of job opportunities. And so, for example, in the United States, at one time there was an occupation of a, elevator operator. So there was someone who, stood there to operate the elevator. Those kind of jobs, of course, have disappeared, but now there are other jobs. And so, just to say that, yes, it presents because the nature of technological advances now are very different from what happened before. Now we have biotechnology. There is all sorts of technological advancements that happen that make it a bit different. But just to emphasize that there will be great opportunities in terms of job creation also. But also, of course, there'll be job losses in some occupation in some sectors. And so I think the policy challenge facing countries is how best to support those sectors and technologies that will lead to good quality jobs for their population, while at the same time providing protection, including social protection and retraining and upskilling for those for some of those who will lose their job as a result of technological advances. Thank you.
Yep. Thank you, Mr. Key. So I've got another one or two questions before I move into Mr. Zawad. So I just wanted to congratulate Dr. Terry as well. I think the Global Youth Index is something which my passionate as well, my interest as well. Always looking into the index as a trend, to make sure that we knew which area we are dropping, which area we are, we need to put more emphasis to make sure that the agenda of the youth has been taken care. So I think Youth Development Index is something which can be used as a platform to evaluate on that. So thank you very much. So moving forward, for the next questions to Mrs. Zawad. Okay, can you elaborate on the implications of climate change adaptation policies? Do we have an effective adaptation policy that can be a role model for other countries in the tropics? So do you think that based on your experiences and also expertise in the climate change, do you think that we have already got one or we need to work on it?
Well, I think we have to work in the policy level from the very beginning. Whenever I was actually reading some articles, I see that recently World Bank has published a report named the Adaptation Policy, which is in a generic form for all the countries, and they have already highlighted 6 points like building resilient foundation, helping farms to do their part, revise land use plan, manage impact, prioritize according to NEC, micromanagement, and so on. But what I think policy level should be in the micro and macro, both level. And in the government, the local government should work in that particular phase as well. Because whenever we are actually making some kind of policy, actually the youth are not being involved. And there is still a gap between the stakeholders and the youth. I think we have to, like, the country people or the stakeholders should hear our voice, because what we want to say, that sometimes what we feel that, well, the government is not looking after us and they are not taking our words into actions, because there is still a gap. I think what we can do, the policy makers should actually involve the students in the parliament as well, because we are the youth who want to work as well. So I think if we go to the parliament, or if we go to the ministry level, we can actually raise our voice, what we want. And the experience that I will face in the urban areas will be much more different to the experience in the rural areas, or the people who are living in the coastal areas or the cyclone prone areas. So I think everyone should be included, and that's what Dr. Terry, Dr. Key, and all were so that the inclusiveness is very important. I think we are actually approaching towards the inclusive society, and to move to that particular, we have to ensure the equity first, and then we can move to the equality. So I think everyone should be included here.
Thank you very much. I think we are on the same page. I think that should be one. We, at the initial stage, we should have one of the panel as the talking about the political participations and all that as part of this. So that will be very, very, very interesting if, let's say, we could able to have that speakers or panelists, to discuss further on these particular issues. But that is good. I think, most of the countries, most of the governments, agencies and all that are looking forward to make sure that, the young voices are always there to make sure that, the challenges, because like what you mentioned, it is not about what we think. We want people out there, what they are thinking, especially the youth. If let's say the voices are heard and the voices are transferred or transformed into any policies to make sure that the benefits, the development of this particular people has been taken care, then you're talking about something which has been, but I'm not saying it is not happening. I think around the world, everyone acknowledge this, and everyone, most of the countries, and to be very specific, I'm very sure Tropics are also looking into this as well to make sure that the voices of the youth will be heard in the future. And talking about the voices of the we have 5 minutes before we wrap up this and move into the launch. Talking about Global Youth Development Index, Dr. Terry, you did mention in your presentations that when you coming up with the domains and also indicator, you consider youth voices in terms of coming up with the domains and indicator. That's a good point. It is not something that we think it is important for the youth, but we involve them as part of the process. So all the domains and indicator. Do you want to say something about this?
Yes, thank you for the opportunity to speak to that. This is one of the most important things for us as a Commonwealth. We undertake this work because it's a part of our commitment to youth empowerment. And so nothing we do is done in the Commonwealth Youth Program without young people. In fact, moving forward, our entire Secretariat will now be adopting a youth mainstreaming approach to our work, which means that in all our work on peace, democracy, trade, climate change, economic development, all of it will have a mainstreamed approach to take into account the perspectives and views and implications of decision making for young people. And I think one of the strengths of the index is its inclusive development process that we undertake that includes experts. Bearing in mind that young people themselves are also technical experts. You have people like Zawad who can speak specifically to climate change issues. And so we don't treat young people as a category of person apart from the expert. There are young experts, younger and older experts as a part of this process, but it's absolutely critical. And I think we hope that countries in the tropics will consider looking at the methodology we have used to compute this index and consider bringing together stakeholders in their own communities or countries to develop their own indices, to look at some of the things that are very important to them in their context. We have published a toolkit that outlines the methodology and gives a step-by-step outline of what's required to prepare an index of your own at the national or regional level. And we hope people will also use that resource so that we can continue to monitor our progress for young people, with young people.
Thank you, Dr. Terry. That is really a great insight. I think, your suggestion, if let's say the Tropics take this challenge, to make sure that, they have their own youth index, it won't be called as the Global Youth Development Index. Maybe it could be Tropics Youth Development Index, So that development index could be very particularly about the needs of the youth in the tropics. It might be something slightly similar with the Global Youth Development Index, but very specific to the youth. The youth in the tropics, there are some differences in terms of, their lifestyle, in terms of their educations and all that. So I think that could be the way forward in the future. I support the idea. So hope, this platform, Trop Science 2021, will take this as one of the challenge to make sure that in the near future we do have our, development index by ourselves. So I think we're almost there with the panel discussions. We have 1 minute plus. So I think I'm going to just proceed this for the next event, which is the launch of the Global Youth Development Index. We are starting a bit 1 minute slightly earlier than our schedule. So I would like to invite the Secretary General of the Commonwealth Secretariat to present this. The floor is yours.
Excellencies, distinguished guests, Commonwealth friends and colleagues, it is good to have this opportunity to address you as we launch our Global Youth Development Index report and website. The topics and factors covered in the report have seldom, if ever, been of such immense importance as now, nationally and internationally, and above all, multilaterally. It is vital for us to work together in mutual support to recover and rebuild from the sad losses and other consequences of the COVID-19 pandemic. In order to build back better, it is imperative that we draw on the energy and imagination of our young people. Following a period of immense social and economic dislocation and turmoil, our focus for the future must be on reconnecting with one another and on innovating and transforming to build greater resilience in our systems. In the Commonwealth, we are fortunate to be able to draw on the resourcefulness and creativity of the more than 1.2 billion young people between the ages of 15 and 29 years who live in our 54 member nations and who are indispensable to delivering a common future which is fairer and more inclusive, more sustainable and more resilient. Continuing progress towards achieving the Sustainable Development Goals is vital to building the world we want to see. And to do so, we need to be able reliably and progressively to measure and monitor the ways in which young people live, learn, and work in our communities. We need to be able to assess the extent to which young people are encouraged and empowered to add their contributions to our societies and supported with enabling policies and tools. The Global Youth Development Index, a gift from the Commonwealth to the world, is one of the tools that has significantly enhanced our capacity to interrogate and assess that progress. Now in its third iteration, this 2020 index has been expanded to include additional and broader measurements of factors which affect progress on equality and inclusion and on peace and security, whilst continuing to analyse changes in the foundational elements of the index: education, health and well-being, employment and opportunity, and political and civic participation. In order to advance youth development in our Commonwealth family, we have included a discrete review of the Commonwealth member states, with specific attention given to our small states, who are peculiarly vulnerable at this time of acute climatic and financial risk as we emerge from the pandemic. The multiplicity of the risks faced by small and vulnerable states obliges us to look beyond GDP as the sole criterion for assistance. A new measure needs to be found, one which will more accurately evaluate the reality they face and build the resilience which is necessary if we are to guarantee the security which our young people need. We hope that our proposals for a universal vulnerability index will work in harmony with our youth index so that our young people are not at risk of being left behind. The title of the report, Taking Charge of Our Future, was chosen carefully to express the content it presented primarily from the perspective of youth. We believe young people have the innovative solutions to drive the change we need to see in the world as we grapple with the consequences of a pandemic. Through case studies, we demonstrate the meaningful ways in which young people are already taking responsibility for their future and successfully leading sustainable development work at all levels of society. This report we launched today should be seen as reflecting on policy issues which define our contemporary world: mental health and well-being, unemployment, climate change, and social inclusion and political participation. A principal objective is for the report and its contents to be used to create additional opportunities for intergenerational dialogue and lead to greater inclusion of youth perspectives in all aspects of thinking and planning on development. In rebuilding nationally and internationally, in our communities and collectively in the Commonwealth, from the many impacts COVID-19, it will be important to focus on the fundamentals of human capital development. This means paying attention in particular to depredations and disproportionate disruption to education employment experience by young people. We need transformative programs for investing in the health and well-being of our youth and for mobilizing their advocacy and practical action to build a more equal, just, and peaceful world. Let us be inspired by the profiles featured in this report of Commonwealth youth who, through their imagination and innovation, with commitment to collective action and inclusiveness, are driving forward in fairer and more sustainable ways delivery of our common future.
The Youth Development Index, or YDI, is an aggregate of indicators that measure progress on youth development around the globe. The 2020 Youth Development Index measured progress in 181 countries, including 48 of the 54 Commonwealth countries, across 6 domains of youth development: health and well-being, education, employment and opportunity, political and civic participation, and, for the first time, peace and security, and equality and inclusion. Changes in 27 indicators across all 6 domains were tracked over the period 2010 to 2018, charting progress of young people aged from 15 to 29 years old. Each YDI score is a number between 0 and 1, with 1 representing the highest level of youth development, allowing countries to be rated as having very high, high, medium, or low levels of youth development. Increasing or declining scores signal the need for further investigation and dialogue and prompt action to scale up good practice or undertake reforms. And while the YDI score isn't a definitive analysis of each country's policies or programs, it plays a major role in ensuring that young people don't get left behind in their pursuit of the Sustainable Development Goals. Anyone can access the data, making it a vital tool to researchers, policymakers, civil society, and, of course, young people themselves, helping check their progress towards youth development in the world across 6 key domains of youth development.
Thank you very much. My sincere appreciation to the
Commonwealth Secretariat is pleased to launch the 2020 Global Youth Development Index Report at the International Tropical Sciences Conference in partnership with the Mahathir Science Award Foundation and the Academy of Sciences, Malaysia.
Thank you very much. My sincere appreciation to the Commonwealth Secretariat. I think this is a great job. It's been done by the Commonwealth Secretariats, and that has been continuously some good efforts from the Secretariat. And this year we have this report, we contain 181 countries. So thank you very much for that. So we are almost there in the final stage of our discussions. So I would just ask, since we have got 3 presenters here, so maybe one word from each of you to make sure that it could be able to catch up or to be recorded in our Tropics Science 2021. So one word that you think it is appropriate for you to say about the future of youth in the tropics, just in any ways that you understand and you wanted to say that to us. So maybe Dr. Terry can start with something first.
Okay, I think the future for youth in the tropics is bright once we give them the space to take charge of our common future.
Thank you. What about you, Mr. Key?
So thanks very much. I think the future needs to be inclusive. I think that's something, in fact, Terry-Ann had emphasized, but to re-emphasize from my end that we see divergences between countries, we see divergences between adults and young people, we see divergence between rural and urban areas, and so the need for the future to be bright for all, so for an inclusive future. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Zawad.
I think we have to ensure our inclusion, and that's how we will be empowered. The youth will be empowered, and this global village will be empowered.
Thank you. I think my conclusion is, I think all of us, the efforts that we put together in this platform should be continued. So we should able to have continuous efforts to make sure that the youth in the tropics will be much more taken care. So I think the continuous efforts, projects, programs, and also initiative by the government, by all the stakeholders should come together in helping the youth in the tropics. So we are almost there in the conclusion. I think we have got 3 minutes plus. So I would like to just take this opportunity to say a few words, based on the presentation done, starting with Dr. Terry. So I would like to just mention, I think in conclusion, so there is a lot of platforms which has been discussed about the Global Youth Development Index, and index are always the best way to identify the trends, and we support the ideas of the Commonwealth Secretariats, and we would like to see these things in the tropics as well in the near future. So that is one thing from your part, and also the impact of the policy changes is not always the evidence, to make sure that something which good happens to the youth. But I think a continuous effort is something that we are looking forward. And I like the words from the presentation: improve, prepare, update, increase and promote. These are some of the words that we should consistently think about our future as well for the youth in the tropics. And looking into the second presenter, Mr. Key, I think you have mentioned about most of the data which you displayed about the unemployment among the youth in the tropics. I think, and also one important things that capture my mind is about inactive youth in the tropics, which is the need group. I think these are the groups that need some special attentions by the tropical countries, to make sure that these are the group of people not just left behind, because these people are the assets of the country, the assets of the tropics, whatever the countries they are, And looking forward for Encik Zawad, I think you have done a good job, 50 articles, 10 climate quiz, episodes, a few episodes as a project. I think there should be a lot of people like you out there to do more projects based programs. And of course, one biggest challenge for us is the funding. If let's say everyone is open up into this, to make sure that if you want to see the challenge, the differences, you have to spend. You have to transform a certain extent of financial to make sure that it happens. I think in the tropics, I think we should address this, particularly in terms of the projects as well. So I've got few conclusion. We noticed that achieving youth resilience in addressing climate change adaptations will require placing grassroots communities at the center of resilient planning, like what we mentioned, since they are the ones driving actions from the ground up. The value of citizenship engagement for the resilient recovery must be recognized, and major issues faced by the youth in the tropics should be in the area of education advancement, employment gap and skill sets needed, health, climate change, political policy enhancement for youth, the importance of the science and technology in the tropics, participations in the decision-making process. I think this is something which is very important, among the youth in the tropics, and also the United Nations systems approach to youth in the tropics should be something which need to be addressed, and regional and national efforts in creating youth policy. We do have youth policies in the region, in a particular countries. I think this need to be enhanced, need to be looked at, need to be continuously make some adjustment and changes according to the needs of the youth in the tropics. So with that, I conclude the sessions, and thank you very much, Dr. Terry, Mr. Key, and Mr. Zawad, and also Dr. Clarissa, for the wonderful sharing that you guys committed to be with us in the Trop Science 2021. So until we see each other in the next platform, thank you very much. All the best to you guys. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.